I've realised that we are evolving as fly anglers. Climate changes have meant more of us are heading to the coast for saltwater species or casting a fly for carp. In winter, when the rivers have been too high for grayling, we'll look for pike instead. My guest today will look at just about anything with a fly rod, and I'm hoping to learn about his fly fishing timeline and the species he'll tie on a fly for. I'm pleased to welcome Elijah Waite to this edition of the podcast. Elijah, it's great to catch up with you. Are you well?
I'm good, thank you. I've not done a huge amount of fishing over the past couple of weeks, but I have uni work that I've needed to do. So, yeah, I'm doing okay.
So are you at the stage where you start that countdown for the season? It sounds as though you're busy, as you say, with university work, that you're getting flies tied and you're subconsciously or even consciously thinking about what's about to come?
Well, it's exactly 1 month today before the trout season opens in my area. I am very excited. There's a lot of, I say a lot, there's a few small streams around me where I can catch trout. It's mostly coarse fish around me, so when the trout season starts and the coarse season ends, it cuts back on a lot of my places I can fish. But there are some good places I can still fish during the close season, so it's not too bad. And I do love fishing for trout.
Lovely. And for our listeners, whereabouts are you based?
Leicestershire.
So trout streams, I guess, from what you've said, although they're your first love, does that mean they're a little harder to come by?
Yeah, we have the River Soar that runs through like the county, but that's mostly a coarse fish river. It's small tributaries of that, and where you do occasionally get a population of trout. There's some quite large ones, but they're mostly fairly small.
I like the sound of that. And it's those unsung streams that I love to hear about as well, which are really exciting. And does that mean then from where you're based and the fishing that you have, that you look at a wider range of species other than just trout then as a result of it?
Yeah, if I only fish for trout, I would get nowhere near as much fishing done as I do. I think the reason why I like fly fishing so much is because it has this versatility that I can just go out for an hour, and no matter what body of water I'm fishing, there is a way for me to catch fish from there. Because anything will take a fly, and I don't need to carry around bait and rucksacks and stuff like that. I can just go down to the nearest bit of water and have a cast.
And have you found as a result of that you've been surprised by some of the species that you've caught?
I wouldn't say surprised, because all fish eat the same things. There are fish that it's harder to tempt to take a fly than others. But the hardest thing for like species that are a little bit more unusual is just a lot of the time just finding them. Finding somewhere where you can catch tench and eels and stuff like that is really hard, just because you need to have clear water to see the fish so you can present a fly to them. And just having a body of water where there's good enough numbers of those species with clear water that what's within fly casting range is quite tricky.
Does that mean you do a lot of reconnaissance and very few casts on a day's fishing?
No, because there's usually other fish in the water. I have caught an eel on one occasion. I caught a tench on one occasion, and on both of those times, I wasn't fishing for either of them. I was fishing for trout, and I was just wandering along the length of this little stream and saw one in the margin and decided I was going to change my fly and have a cast for them.
And were you surprised with you? And that must have been something completely out of the blue.
It was a little stream in St David's in Wales. I went there on a field trip with my course. And I was fishing for the trout that are in the stream, and I just saw it on the bottom of one of the pools. So I took the little trout fly I had on. I can't remember what it was. I took that off and put a squirmy worm on. And as soon as it hit the deck in front of the eel, he came over and ate it.
That is absolutely extraordinary. I remember I was recording a live podcast with Dylan Hooley and we saw a flounder and he just flipped a fly at that. It would come a fair way up the river and it was on it completely straight away. Extraordinary.
They are a species I'd love to catch at some point.
So does that mean that you're looking at many species? I've friends over the years that have count the number of rivers they fished and the various species. Are you always looking to target different species?
It's not very often that I will go somewhere with the intention of targeting a new species. There's not that many freshwater species left that I need to catch. I need to catch 10 crucian carp. I need to catch a Wells catfish. I've never caught a salmon. I've not caught like a sunbleak or a bitterling or a pumpkin seed. Some of the weird species that there's a few lakes that have them in, but I've never got around to going and targeting those. Most of the time, if I catch a new species, it's just because I'm somewhere and that species happens to also be there. As an example, I caught a scad last year, a horse mackerel. But I only caught it because I was fishing for bass with a friend at the time, and we saw a school of mackerel and decided to cast into it. I hadn't gone there with the intention of catching mackerel, but I got a new species out of it.
Nice, I like that. And it's like I was saying at the very beginning, that do you think we are evolving? You've said trout are your first love, but do you think that we are evolving as fly anglers rather than being a trout fisherman or a salmon fisherman? We should look at ourselves as fly anglers and people like yourselves and many others, Dave and Tim, and there's so many out there that are looking to try and target other species. Do you think we should be thinking about labeling ourselves as fly anglers rather than specific species?
Well, I don't know. Everyone has their preferences, and even within the coarse fishing, like coarse on the fly community, there are people who prefer to fish for one or two species of coarse fish over like multi-species fly angling. Hector, for example, his barbel and his pike. He's fantastic at fishing for those, and he just fishes for those because that's what he enjoys fishing for. I think that's perfectly fair enough. But I do think that coarse fish on the fly is something that will probably become more prevalent over the coming years. Chub are already a common fish for people to target. Pike, perch on the resis. You see people catching the perch a lot, and zander. I think the biggest benefit of targeting species other than trout and grayling is just their accessibility. It's cheap. It's cheap and easy. There's almost always a little ditch near someone's house that'll have a few chub and dace and roach in it, and you can just head out there and fish it for usually free.
That's a really interesting point, because I was having this conversation with somebody this morning on one of the very few WhatsApp groups I'm actually on, that we were talking about fly angling as a whole in the UK. And I said, I think one of the big differences, if we look at Scandinavia, for example, or if we looked at America, is that the amount of free fishing. And do you think as a result of that there probably is a bigger community because of that accessibility? And what you're saying, finding a ditch or a canal or whatever that may be, is a way for people to access fishing, and then possibly as a result of that, fly fishing because of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to have some free fishing in the country. Well, not necessarily. Sorry, not necessarily free fishing, but just something that's affordable. I until I met up with Dave, and he sort of pointed me in the right direction of all the trout in my area, I wasn't really a trout angler. I had done a couple of days fishing in the Peak District, but that was about it. Because I think I was what, 16, 17 when I started fly angling. I didn't drive. I couldn't get up to the Peak District very often. There was no clubs that I could really afford to be a member of. So I just started fishing for coarse fish because they were there. And it's great fun. There is so much like fun to be had fishing these small streams with like things like chub and dace and perch in them. You can go through them and have days where you're getting, 60 odd fish sometimes. It's in the summer, it gets silly. You cast into a pool and you'll have 3 or 4 chub chasing your fly out of the pool. Every cast for 3 or 4 or 5 fish out of the pool. It's great.
And was that a game changer for you then, discovering that you didn't need to travel that far, that you had this great mixture of fishing right on your doorstep?
Well, I'd been fishing for coarse fish a lot longer than I was fly fishing with bait and lure. I got into fly fishing for fishing for trout, and then started doing the coarse side of things just because it was what I was used to as a bait and lure angler. There were species that I knew how to catch just because I'd been catching them on other techniques. So I just applied that with the fly fishing. It's definitely a hell of a lot cheaper to go and catch a chub than it is to go and catch a trout for me.
Yeah. And so how did you evolve as an angler? What made you want to pick up a fly rod for the first time? And since you've done that, does that mean that you haven't really gone back to the other methods of fishing, or are you using them side by side?
So I started fly fishing because I was going on a holiday to France with my family. And on the way there, we stopped off in an Aldi. And in the middle aisle of Aldi, they have that aisle that's full of all the just random bits of crap. And they had a fly rod in there. And they had a few bits of fishing kit. They had a fly rod and they had a couple of carp rods. And I was torn between getting a carp rod or a fly rod. I eventually went with the fly rod. And when we went on this holiday to France, we were staying on the banks of the River Sioule, which is in Auvergne, which is like right in the center of France. It's a big river, but it's mostly shallow and wadable, and there's coarse fish in there. So I went out and I caught some fish with the little the dry flies that were in the kit that I bought. And I kept at it when I got home. For the first year of fly fishing, I was doing a lot of lure and bait fishing alongside it. But after a while, I just stopped going bait fishing and lure fishing. I do occasionally go bait fishing, especially if I'm taking someone fishing for the first time. I sometimes won't introduce them to fishing through fly fishing, because the casting can be a little tricky. If you've never fished before and you go fishing and you spend the entire day trying to figure out how to get your flies in the water and don't catch anything, it can be a little disheartening, I imagine. So the only times I'll go bait fishing now is if I'm taking someone fishing, or if I'm fishing with my little brothers.
And how was that process for you, learning to cast? It sounds as though it worked for you because you caught fish on dry flies on the stream in France. But how was that? Was it a big learning process, or did you find that you naturally picked up the rod and it felt okay to cast it?
There was another person staying at the campsite who was a fly angler. And even though I didn't speak to him, I could see him out on the river fishing. And I was just trying to imitate his casting, and that's how I managed to get to a point where I could land my flies in the water on that trip. And then after that it was just practicing fly casting, watching videos of people fly casting, going to the park with a fly rod with a little bit of cloth on the end of your line, just practicing getting that line moving. That was how I learnt to cast.
Lovely. And that's the perfect way to do it, and the modern way to do it, I guess, now. By watching videos, you can pick up so much so quickly, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I've learnt has been over the internet.
And you've mentioned Dave, and for listeners, I'm guessing you're talking about Skateboard Dave, who was out there years before many others talking about coarse fish on the fly. I remember in Total Fly Fisher many years ago, him writing about coarse fish on the fly. And was he an inspiration and a mentor for you?
So I didn't know that Dave lived in Leicestershire for a couple of years. I was fly fishing, I think probably a year and a half by the time that I knew who Dave was. I wasn't really involved in like the fly fishing community for the first like year or so of me actually going fly fishing. And I just got Dave recommended to me on Instagram, and I checked out his account and I recognised that he was in Leicester from the background of some of his posts. So I sent him a message asking if we could meet up for a fish, and I offered to show him one of the spots that I had in the back of my mind. And yeah, we met up for a fish, and he absolutely thrashed me. And yeah, we've been in touch ever since. But he has taught me a significant amount of what I know. He is, I would say, he's probably the best coarse fly angler in the UK, at least in terms of how many species he's caught and how much knowledge he has for every species that he's caught. You ask him about any species, and he's got a fly choice already. He knows where to go and get them. It's just a wealth of knowledge that man has from just years of experience doing something like that.
And what was that like then, that first day where you say that he thrashed you? What did you take from that? Did you realise, was it casting? Was it presentation? Was it fly selection? Was it all of those things?
It was presentation and fly selection, I think, were the big things. Because until that point, fishing for coarse fish, I was fishing streamers and sometimes nymphs. And we were fishing a small stream. It was in winter. We'd had a bit of rain. There was a little bit of colour in the water. And Dave was showing me his downstream nymphing method that he's pioneered. And that was quite a game changer for the coarse fish. You can Euro nymph for them, and it does work, especially in summer. But in winter, just holding the fly in their face for a little while just seems to work really well for some reason. Yeah, that was a big change compared to what I was doing for the coarse fish.
That's fascinating you mentioned that, because we've had Jeff Hadley on here, and I think he mentioned exactly the same about that holding of the fly, which, I'm guessing he's learned from experience, or perhaps from Dave as well, that these little subsections of fly fishing are figuring out these fascinating and interesting ways that hopefully more of us will look at. And you mentioned chub as well. And are they a favourite of yours to catch? And if so, for listeners, would you give any advice for how to best target them?
Chub are a fantastic species to target. They were the first fish I caught on a fly. There's lots of them everywhere. Normally, almost all rivers will have some chub in them somewhere. And as with trout, chub are fantastically versatile creatures. They will take anything. You can pull a streamer past them and they'll take that. You can fish big fat foam dries and they'll take those. You can fish little tiny nymphs and drift that past their heads and they'll take those. My favorites are little tiny jig streamers, so like size 14, 16, marabou tail and a fairly heavy tungsten bead, because then you get that plop as the fly hits the water, and that really gets the chub going. They come over and investigate what that plop is. and big foam dries, just because who doesn't like a dry fly eat?
That sounds a perfect mix. And with the streamers or your small jig streamers, is that a visual thing for you? Are you looking for that sign of the fish eating the fly and you're setting on it, or is there anything else that you're looking for in that process?
It's a bit of both. In the summer, you can usually see the fly. A lot of the streams I fish, they are not very big, so if I'm casting to a fish, I can see my streamer coming back and I see the fish turn and chase it down. Chub have a white inside of their mouth, so you can see that white flash behind the fly as they eat it, and that's often quite a good telltale sign that you've got a fish on. Watching the tip of the rod or the end of your fly line just for little twitches as you're pulling it back, that can really help with bite detection.
And what about indicators and dead drifting? Would that work?
I've not done a huge amount of dead drifting nymphs and stuff for chub or streamers. I'm sure it would work. I'm sure, especially in summer when the coarse fish are more willing to chase down a fly. I use indicators on canals for bite detection. I use them downstream nymphing. I use them on when I'm fishing ponds and stuff, but they're not something I bring out too regularly on the rivers, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it was just my thinking about it. You're getting me excited about finding some chub and having a go at those as well. So I'm just trying to learn as much as I possibly can. You mentioned Hector as well, and we saw him at Orvis in Stockbridge. He popped in, which was great to see him, and was able to congratulate him. I know it was a kelp, but on the salmon in the Wandle, which was an amazing story in itself.
Yeah, I heard about that. Incredible.
Yeah, fantastic. And people like him and yourself are doing these wonderful things. And he's, for me, and as you've said, pike and synonymous with barbel as well. A barbel a fish that you're keen on as well?
Yeah, I enjoy fishing for and catching barbel. There's just not that many rivers where it's feasible, unfortunately. Because you need a fairly strict set of conditions for barbel on the fly. You know, you have to be in a river where it's shallow enough for you to get close to the fish. It has to be clear enough that you can see the fish really. And there has to be good enough numbers of barbel that you can go somewhere and go and target them. And there aren't that many rivers in the UK that have these conditions all at once, and certainly not any in Leicestershire. So they're not a fish I get to target very often, but I do always enjoy when I get the chance to go and catch one.
And what's your preferred method there? Are you a squirmy fan, or is there anything else that you're targeting with?
I'm a squirmy fan.
Yep.
I'm quite lazy when it comes to fly choice. For most things, I just put a streamer on or I put a squirmy on, because everything will take off. Everything eats a worm. It's just a safe bet of mine. If I can't figure out what they want, just put a squirmy on, because they're going to eat that regardless.
And I think simplicity speaks volumes as well, and is a great approach. Within that squirmy selection, though, does that mean you'll have a variety of weights and colours, or will it be the standard sort of reds, pinks, root beer colours, those sorts of things, or will you look outside of that as well?
So I use the three colours I use are red, pink, and coral. For coarse fish, I tend to go fairly lightly weighted, because I find that it helps with them sort of sucking the flies into their mouths, especially the smaller mouthed coarse fish. I tie them anything from sort of size 14 down to size 20. You can get like really thin squirmy material from some of those like toys that you find in the tat shops, those like animals covered in little jelly hairs. You cut those hairs off. You can use those as small squirmy material, and they're really great for things like roach and dace and rudd and gudgeon, where the mouth isn't very big, so you need a small fly for them to get it into their mouth. I use unweighted squirmies a fair amount for carp. You can just flick it in front of them as they're cruising around, and they'll often take it. I use heavy ones for small perch. Like I'll have a long tail on a size 14 hook and then a 4mm tungsten bead. I use those for jigging for perch on canals and fishing for wrasse and stuff in the sea with those. So they have that sort of jiggy action to them. They're just a really great versatile fly. I know some people don't count the squirmy or it's a controversial fly for some people, but it's just a safe bet, I find.
And I like part of that as well, of this culture of what you're doing is seeking out materials that you can use and finding those. And I remember when bass was starting to properly get going, that people were looking in craft shops and places like that to find that material that would work really well for them for bass as well. And I love that aspect of it as well. And while we're on the squirmies, do you manipulate them? Are you moving them a great deal? Are you jigging all of them? I know you mentioned that for perch. Or again, would that be a dead drift situation, or is it a manipulation?
So for things like perch and wrasse, and to a lesser extent chub, jigging squirmies can be a really effective technique. If you have a squirmy with a long tail, just really small twitches of your rod will get that tail moving up and down like a sort of undulating in the water, and that can be really effective for the fish that are a little bit more predatory. For things like roach and dace, they're less inclined to chase a fly down. They definitely will. They can be as aggressive as they want when they want to be. But a lot of the time with the downstream nymphing for those sort of species, you're casting it out and you're just really slowly retrieving, giving little tiny twitches sometimes, letting your flies drop back in the current a little bit. A more subtle approach often works better with the smaller mouth coarse fish.
And you touched on carp there as well. And are you fishing waters that you are able to actually see those fish and see the reaction from them?
Sometimes, most of the time when I'm catching carp, it's from there's a little pond in Leicester that I sometimes fish that's got carp in it, or there's a couple of match fisheries nearby that have the match pond pasties that have been caught 200 times. If you're on the match ponds, a lot of the time you're trying to avoid the carp because you want to catch the things like bream and roach that are a little bit more unusual to catch. The most fun I have when I'm fishing for carp is when I'm sight fishing them, seeing them cruising around on the top and flicking a fly in front of them, watching their head turn and seeing their mouth open. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I know my friend Dave I've been talking with about perhaps heading to somewhere or other and sight fishing for them where I can, because I just don't have those sorts of opportunities, and I don't mind how people want to target them at all. But for me, I think I love the visual aspect of any form of fly fishing, and seeing, as you say, a fish cruise round like that and see it eat that fly is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's. I think it might be the best part of fly fishing is seeing that take, because it's such a visual sport a lot of the time. Seeing the fish eat your fly is always fun, and even indirectly seeing the fish eat your fly. Like if I'm fishing on a match pond and I've got my flies, sank down deep, and I'm just washing the tip of my line for takes or whatever, just seeing the line shoot away with a fish on it, it's always exciting.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. So we've talked about a lot of species there, and it sounds as though you head to the coast as well. And again, it looks as though those slightly more unusual species are slightly more interesting to you. Would I be right by that?
Yeah, it's fun to head off the beaten path, fishing, something I feel like all fly anglers should have in the back of their mind is fishing in rock pools with little jig flies like squirmies or mini streamers, because it's something you can do on a family holiday. If you need to scratch that fishing itch, you can bring a little short dry fly rod along and just go down to the rock pools, and even in half an hour you can go around and jig some squirmies and catch some blennies and scorpions and wrasse, and get back to your family in half an hour and you've had 10, 15 fish in that half an hour just going around the rock pools. That's something that's a hell of a lot of fun, and I feel like people do not do enough of.
Nicely said. Nicely said. And does that mean mullet would... I'm guessing mullet would be of interest to you, aren't they?
Yeah, I've caught a few mullet. But being in Leicester, it's hard to get to the coast. So whenever I am at the coast, I just take like the opportunities as they come, so to speak. If I'm somewhere where there's mullet, I'll fish for the mullet. If I'm somewhere where there's not mullet, I'll fish for the other things that are there. I don't drive, so I don't have a lot of choice in where I'm going when I get to the coast. Most of the times that I've been to the coast over the past couple of years has been field trips with my uni or holidays with my mates or whatever. It's not like, I'm heading to the coast today to go for a fish. I have a trip in a few months that I need to prepare for, and I do as much research into the species that are there so that I'm definitely ready, so that when I get there, I have all the tools at my disposal to catch anything that could be there. Yeah, mullet are cool, but you don't get many in Leicester.
How about then, let's go full circle, and you said trout your first love. What is it about trout that you love so much?
They're pretty fish. They often live in pretty places. And as with chub, they're versatile. They'll eat anything. You can pull a streamer past them, they'll take that. You can fish dries, they'll take those. You can fish nymphs, they'll take those. There's so many ways to go about fishing for them. Yeah, they're just an awesome species. There's just something special about a large male brown trout with his hooked jaw, and it's just a gnarly fish. They're just impressive to look at.
Yeah, they're stunning. And I enjoyed watching a video that Tim James did with you, and it was fascinating watching you fish a tiny little stream with a streamer. And your technique was really, really interesting. And I'm sure there's people listening who fish small streams and probably put off a little bit by throwing a streamer and thinking they've got to rip it back. But do you want to explain a little bit about how you might fish your streamers in a small stream situation?
Yeah, so I use a long rod for small streams. My go-to rod for small streamers and trout fishing is an 11-foot 2-weight. And basically, my main reason for that is that I can bow and arrow cast, and that gives me a cast that's 2 times the length of the rod or whatever. So that's a 22-foot cast without having to backcast, which I think is a really big thing on a small stream. Not trying to avoid the backcast is important especially when it's really overgrown. And as well, just having the length of the rod means even without casting, my flies are over 10 foot from where I'm stood. So I can be stood in a bush, and I can be stood 10 foot from the river and just drop the fly in and jig it up and down. And I am working this fly without even having to cast, without having to get near the river. It's so useful having that few foot longer than most people would take on a small stream. Streamers are the choice for small streams for me, because you can jig them almost vertically. You don't need a big pool to be working this fly and making it look like something that's alive. On some of these streams, you'll have a pool and it's maybe the size of a doormat, where you have just this impression of deeper water where there's a trout sat, and it can be hard to get a good drift with a nymph. You've got such a small window to get your fly down, and having a dry fly come over the top, it's tough to get decent drifts in some of these small pools. But with a streamer, you can hold the rod above the pool, drop the streamer in, and just move your rod tip up and down, and then the fly stays in that area where the fish is hiding, and it's enticing, and the fish can come out and take it without you having to worry about, is this drift going to go right? Can he see this fly? It makes things a lot easier.
And I guess with that streamer in those small little pots as well, that it's going to be a pretty quick yes or no from the fish as well, isn't it?
yeah, it's if you don't get a take first or second cast, there's possibly not even a fish there. Usually, when you're pulling a streamer through these little pools, it's you have interest within the first few casts all the time.
That's a wonderful tip, and I hope listeners get something from that. And it's fascinating speaking to younger anglers like yourself that, we're aware of the 10-footer rods and the 9-footers, 10-footers, and speaking to Adam Price Hunt recently as well with the nymphing. I'm seeing over this winter, again, people are taking the lengths of rods that little bit further and finding how much use they can get out of them. And this is a wonderful example of that case. And is that something that you sort of kind of figured out from being on the river, that having that longer rod or almost pole situation, that it's giving you a little bit more reach, that you've suddenly thought, well, let's lengthen and see how far we can go with this?
It's definitely something I've picked up from D. I was talking to him about buying a rod for coarse fish on the fly, and he said go with a longer rod. So I went with a longer rod, and I immediately saw the advantages of doing that. Yeah, it's 100% something I picked up from Dave.
And how about the patterns? We've talked about the patterns. Does that mean that you are a keen fly tyer?
Yeah, so I tie all my own flies. Mostly because I can get really specific with what I want out of the fly. I'm crap at tying pike flies, so Hector's always my man to go to when I need pike flies. But for small saltwater flies and coarse flies and trout flies, I tie pretty much all of my flies, just because I can decide on a whim, like, okay, I want this to be a heavy fly with marabou tail and rubber legs, and rather than having to go and find a fly that looks like what I want or go and get someone to commission it, I can just make the fly. Especially with coarse fish on the fly and saltwater fish on the fly, it's really hard to find decent coarse and saltwater flies online. You can buy Klauses and stuff and bait fish patterns, but I mean for things like wrasse and blennies and stuff, no one's tying those flies commercially. With how trout focused it is, all of the flies are there's thick wire hooks and large hooks and tough like hackle that's fairly stiff and harder for the coarse fish to get into their mouths. It's good to have the ability to tie flies, I think, because then you can just pick and change for the occasion. If you're fishing somewhere where, I am going to be catching this species, you can tie flies in advance for that trip that are catered to that specific water and those species. I think it's a useful tool to have the ability to tie flies.
Does that mean your flies are constantly evolving?
I wouldn't say that. I've got a few select patterns that I think that work, and I will just make sure I have a few of each of these like choice flies on me whenever I go out fishing. I like to try new things with my flies, but I find it's almost certainly just a confidence thing. But I always just find myself going back to like tried and tested patterns that I know work.
And we're going to move on a little bit now. And you've touched on the university you're studying. You've talked about field trips. You've talked about your research as well, which makes me think, would it be something scientific that you're studying?
So I study geology with paleontology. It's very interesting. I wouldn't say I prefer paleontology to fly fishing, but it is something that's really, really interesting to me. Growing up in Leicestershire, we lie on the same rocks that on the Yorkshire and the Jurassic coast. So these are the places, of course, famous for their fossils, but Leicester is not really famous for its fossils. But it has the same rocks underneath it that come out in these places. And a lot of the small brooks that I fish, while I'm going through fishing them, there'll be bits where they cut deep enough to go into the bedrock a little bit, and I can find Jurassic fossils while I'm fishing in these brooks. I love paleontology. It's really interesting. Geology is so incredibly interesting as well. Field geology, going to an environment and looking at like little details in the rocks to try and piece together what the environment was, millions of years ago. You can look at things that most people would they wouldn't know. It's just like, oh, there's a rock. It's got like sand in it. But from that, you can glean so much information from the way the sand has like settled and the colors and things like that. You can figure out what it was like when what it was like hundreds of millions of years ago in this exact spot.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that very, very much. How would you describe yourself as an angler? Do you like to fish alone, or do you like the company of a fellow angler or two?
I like fishing with people. I like fishing on my own. I don't mind either way. I like a bit of both. I think I get different things out of them when I fish with people to when I fish alone. When I fish alone, it's more me time. I get to think. I get to sort of ignore the world for a little bit. And when I fish with people, I'm hanging out with a friend, and we're chatting and we're catching fish and having a good time. Yeah, I don't mind either way. I just like fishing.
Yeah, it's fascinating that I'm asking this question a whole lot more now, and that seems to be the view that we get. And when you fish on your own, you fish, in my opinion, that I've experienced, I fish better because I'm more focused on it. Yet I'm sitting there talking to the fish or the dog or whatever that may be in a slightly different way. And I'm more likely to stuff a fish if I'm with a friend, simply because we're chatting and I've missed something or something else has happened, which I don't mind. I enjoy that aspect. Like you say, both of them equally. Do you like to listen to music then if you're on your own? Will you put headphones in and listen to some music?
No, I used to when I lure fished, but I can't when I'm fly fishing. I need actual focus. Yeah. I listen to music and stuff when I'm going to the spots on the train or on the bus or whatever. But when I'm actually fishing, I have to take the earphones out. I need to listen. I need to listen for splashing on the surface. I need to listen for rises. I need to listen just for little things in the environment. Being out in nature is a big part of it, of why I like the sport so much. Just connecting with the natural world is important for me. And having headphones in, you block out the bird sounds and the sound of rain in the trees and the rippling water, and you're just not there,
That's a very compelling argument. Have you had a situation where something's gone catastrophically wrong, a fishing train wreck?
I've had some bad days on the river. I've broke rods. I've blanked. I don't know if I've had anything go catastrophically wrong. I got stuck on some rocks while I was pollock fishing mid last year, and I climbed down this sort of scree slope cliff down to this little like cliff face, and I slid down this sort of flat piece of rock on my arse, and just started fishing at the bottom of it. And I was catching fish. I was having a great time. And then it started raining, and I thought, right, it's probably time to head home now. I've caught a few fish. I've got some fish in my bag to take home and eat, because when you're sea fishing, you're catching 20 pollock. You may as well take a couple home to munch on. I turned around and started trying to climb back up this flat face. I just couldn't do it. I'd get halfway up and then I'd slip back down, and the rocks were pretty goddamn sharp. So I was getting halfway up and then sliding back down on my knees and cutting my knees up pretty bad and holding onto the rock with my hands and cutting my fingers. I think it took me about 45 minutes to get back up to the top of the cliffs. My knees and my shins were a bit of a mess after that. My muscles ached for a couple of days from dragging myself up these rocks. But I caught some fish out of it. It was worth it. I had some nice big pollock. I had fun while I was down there. I just went and bought a rope to help me get in and out easier after that, and just kept fishing there.
Nice. And there is a price for everything, I think, sometimes. And it sounds as though you paid your fare and learnt from it as well, which is important. And the fish keep coming. So that's good to hear. We were talking off mic, and I asked you if you went to the recent BFFI. I'm nursing a BFFI cold, man flu, whatever it may be, just at this very moment, which I always seem to catch. What was your take on it?
I enjoyed the BFFI. I don't. There's no fly shops in Leicestershire, so I never get the chance to go and just look around and see what materials people are using and chat fishing to people. So I enjoyed the BFFI. I had a good time. I bumped into Jeff Hadley while I was there. Roger Taylor from Eden Maid, bumped into him there. I went with Dave. I had Dave with me all day. Yeah, I had a good time. Me and Dave stopped off at a lake on the way home and had a bit of a fish. It was a good day.
It felt to me, I don't know if it was the long winter and not for many of us not being able to get to fish as well, that it was almost a release, and the feel and the vibe of the place I thought was really, really good. Did you detect some of that? And of course you mentioned Jeff because you couldn't miss him in that bloody top, could you?
Yeah, no, I'd never met Jeff before that day. I've been meaning to meet up with him, have a fish. But yeah, no, it was Jeff. I don't know if I told you while I was there, but it was lovely to meet you at the BFFI.
Nice. I'm sure he'll be listening.
Yeah, everyone seemed just excited for the trout season ahead. I think that's what the point of the BFFI being in February is. You know, spring is coming, the snowdrops are out, daffodils are just pushing through. Everyone's getting excited for the coming trout season. Everyone's tying flies. Everyone's stocking up on materials, getting ready for the madness that is mayfly. Yeah, it's a cool event. I enjoy going to it.
Yeah, no, it was very, very good. How does it look to you, though, fishing, the shape and the culture of fishing? How's it feeling and looking to you as somebody looking through younger eyes than mine?
There was quite a few younger people there. I think there is plenty of young people getting into fly fishing. Some with a more trout focused mindset. I think especially if they're getting into fly fishing through their parents being fly anglers or maybe other members of their family, they're definitely going into the more trout focused side of things. But I am seeing a lot of younger people who are getting into fly fishing for the on the side of fishing for not just trout but coarse fish as well. Again, just because I think it's accessible. If you're a student, you can't afford to be paying £500 a year for memberships. But you can go down to the free stream that's near your house and catch some coarse fish.
And how are you connecting with these people? Is there a group of you that are in touch with each other and sharing ideas and perhaps fishing with each other as well?
I think the big one would be the Fly Fishing for Coarse Fish group on Facebook. That's growing to be pretty big now. There's some great people in there. Everyone in that group is happy to offer advice on flies for fly choice and location choice and things like that. That's a great group. I enjoy being a part of that. And just Instagram as well. I've met so many fantastic people through Instagram and through the fly fishing side of things on there. Yeah, I wouldn't be here with you today were it not for the fact that I decided to make an Instagram account for my fishing.
Yeah, no, it makes absolutely perfect sense. Tell me then, do you think those younger people coming in, are they coming in from a similar background as yourself, that they were lure anglers or bait anglers and then they've decided to pick up the fly rod, or do you think they've come straight in as fly anglers?
I'm not sure. I would imagine most of them are coming from some other kind of fishing and then getting into fly fishing. There's a young fly angler who lives over in Norfolk called Stefan, who I fished with a few times. He's a great guy. And he was a bait and lure angler and got into fly fishing because he was looking at fishing some of the Norfolk chalk streams. And he messaged me because he saw the video with Tim and asked on us for some advice on how to fish like that. So we met up for a fish on the same stream that Tim filmed me fishing. Stefan's a great guy. I enjoy fishing with Stefan, but he's come from a lure fishing background.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because for me at least, I think that's where we're going to grow our pastime, finding and embracing these anglers and perhaps giving them the opportunity to pick up a fly rod and try a different method of catching their species. And I think the group that you mentioned there is a ideal and wonderful opportunity to be able to do that. So long may that continue. Have you travelled much to fish away? I know you said obviously that you don't drive. Does that mean that you're staying generally local, or have you travelled further afield to fish?
So I live pretty close to a train station. It's like a 5-minute walk from my house to get to the train station in Leicester, the main one. And there's some really good links to get north and south there. There's a direct train to Sheffield and a direct train to London. And it's only an hour or so on the train to get to both of them. Once a year, I do a trip south to meet up with Tim and Hector and a couple of other people down south. Josh, I fish with Fly Rod on Instagram. Once a year I head down south and have a mad week of fishing with that lot. I do a lot of fishing on all my field trips, just because, opportunity presents itself. So I may as well. I'm doing my first overseas fishing trip this summer. I'm heading to Norway to do some saltwater fishing there. That should be a hell of a lot of fun. I like to travel to fish, but it's tough sometimes. I find I have to plan things in advance a lot because of the train tickets are cheaper to buy 2 weeks before than the day before. So planning in advance to go on these longer trips is really important for me. But yeah, I love it. I love traveling to fish. I love fishing new rivers. It's interesting seeing new water. I think fishing lots of different types of rivers, you learn a lot about fish behavior and how fish hold in different places in the river and what they're feeding on in different rivers. And they're transferable skills for fishing for anything, anywhere,
And what are you going for in Norway?
Cod, pollock, sea trout. I'm going to bring my light rod along to come and try and catch some of the smaller rock pool species. I'm sure there's some blennies and wrasse hanging around the rocks there. That's the plan. I'd like to catch a nice big pollock or a coalfish. That would be very cool. They're again another fish that I think everyone should give a go at some point. Fishing for cod and pollock and that sort of thing on a fly. It's so much fun. Yeah. If you hit it right, you can be stood on these rocks, and every cast you cast out, you wait for your line to sink, strip, you're into a fish. Every cast for an hour as the tide rises and things like that. You can get. I fish with 2 flies when I'm in the sea quite a lot, and you can have 3 or 4 double ups where you've cast and you have 2 fish pulling back in the same cast in a single session. You can have 2 or 3 of those. It's so much fun.
Yeah, count me in. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Do you have a dream destination then? Is there somewhere in the world that you've always wanted to visit, or that's on that bucket list that you would love to go and cast a fly for something or other?
I would love to catch a dorado. I'd like to go to Bolivia at some point. They just seem like an awesome fish. I'd like to go to Mongolia. I'd like to catch a taimen, the biggest salmonid. There again, it's just like that's the holy grail of fly fishing. The biggest trout on earth. I'd like to go more realistically in the next couple of years. I'd like to go somewhere like in the Mediterranean and do some light saltwater fly fishing, catching the small grouper and stuff, catching just somewhere semi-tropical and doing the same sort of thing I do on the coast around here, just to try and catch some of the species which may never have been caught on a fly rod before.
I like your style. And there's so many places and so little time. Dorado, I think, sound an amazing fish, I have to say. And I hope you get someday to get the chance to cast at one or two of them. The dreaded question now, I'm afraid. If you were driving to the water and you were listening to something, what would your music of choice be? What would be the tune that sets the tone for that day's fishing?
Ooh. I like. I listen to quite a lot of jazz. I listen to quite a lot of electronic music. I like Aphex Twin, Herbie Hancock. God, I've got to think now. Cassiopeia. Yeah. Music without lyrics, generally.
Nice. I've just been watching, funnily enough, after this, and this is BS free, that I've been meaning for weeks to listen to Herbie Hancock Headhunter.
Yeah.
I've been watching a documentary about Quincy Jones, and he had Herbie on there, and it looked fantastic, an amazing life. And if anyone gets the opportunity to watch it, it's worth watching. But I'm going to go and listen to Headhunter after this. So thank you for reminding me of that. If people want to find you, how can they find out about your exploits, what you're up to on the water? What are your social media handles?
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. If you search Elijah Waite, my name will probably come up. Or on Instagram, I'm Eli O. Yeah, they're probably the best places to find me. Would be Facebook and Instagram.
Lovely. Well, I recommend people go take a look at that, because it's people like Elijah and other people that we mentioned that are pushing fly fishing on in interesting different directions. And I think these breaths of fresh air are really good for our pastime. As somebody who's a student, though, how do your friends look at your fishing and you as an angler? Do they think you're weird? Do they want to try it? Do they say, well, he's that bloke who does the fishing? How do they view you?
I think there are definitely some of my classmates that find it a little bit odd, but there's also classmates who have come fishing with me and caught fish on the fly, and some of them who have done it in their own time because I've introduced them to fly fishing. Yeah, I think fishing's just something that I think more people should do in general. It gets everyone should have a hobby which forces them to be outside, be it fishing or mountain biking or whatever. And the amount of people who I meet who don't have a hobby that forces them to be outside, I think is a travesty, honestly.
Does that mean that you've converted some of the people that you've taken? They've actually got it? Because it's hard to explain what getting it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But have they got it?
Yeah, a couple of the people that I've introduced to fishing have since been on their own and caught fish on their own. I had a friend from one of my best friends at uni. I introduced to fly fishing, and he went on holiday to somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, I think. And he brought his fly rod along with him. And it was one of the first times he was fly fishing on his own. He was catching all sorts of weird things: grouper, cardinal fish, little banana fish, all sorts of strange things just on little squirmies jigged around the rock pools.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like you've converted people. Elijah, it's been wonderful to catch up. It's been wonderful to learn a little bit about you, about your passion for fly fishing. I'd love to say a huge thank you for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me on. This has been something I've wanted to do for a while. It was a surprise to wake up to the invitation to come on. I think I screamed yes out loud as soon as I read the message. Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you for having me on.
You're more than welcome, and that's made my day. It's been lovely speaking with you. And as I said, I love where you're coming from. I love how you're viewing fishing, promoting fishing, and this ability to fish in places that may not be so obvious. So huge thanks for that. It's been wonderful to catch up. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As ever, this is always free to download. I'm never going to charge you. I just love talking about fly fishing with people and people like Elijah. It's been an absolute joy to see fly fishing through a younger lens, and it fills my heart with joy to hear these sorts of stories and passionate anglers going out there doing some great stuff. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.